I'd never questioned Amelia's loyalty before. She was respected, put together, and students looked up to her. On Fridays, she usually stayed late for lectures and the occasional departmental meeting. But last Friday was different. She hadn't answered any of my texts, hadn't even read them. At first, I chalked it up to her being busy, yet something tugged at me, a quiet unease that grew louder as the evening wore on. By 8, I couldn't shake it anymore. I grabbed my keys and headed to the university. I walked the campus corridors I knew all too well, clutching 2 coffee cups and feeling foolish, as though I were courting her all over again. Her office light was still on, casting a warm glow from behind the closed blinds. My hand rose to knock, but I hesitated when I heard a muffled voice inside. Then I heard her laugh, a familiar, intimate sound, but tinged with something I hadn't heard in years. It made me pause. Pressing myself against the wall, I stole a look through the narrow gap in the blinds. I could barely see, but the outline was unmistakable, Amelia leaning close to a young man, one of her students. Her fingers grazed his forearm as she whispered something. He was nodding, flushed, and then she leaned even closer, closing the space between them in a way that was painfully familiar. My heart dropped. There was no way to explain this away, no misunderstanding, no innocent context. I felt like the ground had fallen out from under me. I don't know how long I stood there, feeling utterly betrayed, my pulse pounding in my ears, but then, as if she sensed my presence, Amelia glanced toward the door. I jumped back, but it was too late. The door opened slightly, and she stepped out, pulling it closed behind her. Her eyes widened as they landed on me. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her cheeks still flushed. I forced a tight smile, though I could feel anger bubbling under the surface. "I could ask you the same thing, Amelia. Your phone's been off all night." "Oh, my battery died," she replied quickly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was just with him." The words came out before I could stop them. Her eyes flicked away from mine, and a spark of guilt crossed her face. It was barely there, but I saw it. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice low, trying to control the damage. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it, Amelia?" I demanded, unable to mask the edge in my voice. "Explain to me what I just saw." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence between us grew thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she drew a shaky breath. "Look, you're blowing this out of proportion. He's just a student who needed guidance." "Guidance? Is that what you call it now?" I shot back, my voice barely above a whisper, though the anger trembled beneath it. "Guidance that requires you to practically throw yourself at him." "Stop it, Ethan," she snapped, her tone shifting to something defensive. "Don't stand here and judge me when you have no idea what's going on." I stared at her, trying to understand the person in front of me, this version of Amelia who was so different from the woman I thought I knew. I wanted to shout, to force her to explain, but I realized I didn't want her excuses. "Not here, not now." "Fine," I said quietly, stepping back, my voice as cold as I felt. "You can explain when you're ready to tell the truth." "Ethan, wait," she called after me, but I was already walking away. Her voice faded as I reached the stairwell, the cold fury in my chest threatening to consume me. I stumbled out of the building and into the night, barely noticing the autumn chill biting at my skin. I walked to my car in a daze, the reality of it all sinking in deeper with each step. Back in the car, I just sat there, gripping the wheel with trembling hands, replaying what I'd seen. The betrayal was like a knife, twisting with every reminder of her words, her touch, her laugh with someone else. For the first time in our marriage, I wanted to hurt her back. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, the shattered trust, the humiliation. The days after my discovery felt like moving through a fog. Every time I looked at Amelia, I saw her in that office with him, smiling, leaning in close, her hand on his arm. The anger was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. I barely spoke to her, avoided her questions, and slept on the couch to keep my distance. I knew I couldn't confront her without proof, something undeniable that would leave no room for her denials or excuses. So, I started laying the groundwork, slowly and meticulously. Late one night, after Amelia had gone to bed, I unlocked her laptop, careful not to make a sound. I'd seen her type in the password enough times to memorize it. My heart pounded as I opened her email, scrolling through messages from students, most of them harmless enough. But then I found a folder tucked away in her archived messages, labeled innocuously as advising. Opening it, I saw a string of emails with students, many of them male, all reading as strangely personal. The language she used was far too familiar, full of compliments, late-night check-ins, and even talk of meeting outside office hours. I felt sick, seeing the intimacy in her words, the same warmth she'd once reserved for me. I saved every email I could, cataloging each one in a folder on my own laptop. As I worked, I knew I needed to talk to someone who could help me keep a level head through this. Sam was the only person I trusted with something this dark. The next evening, I met him at a quiet bar on the edge of town, the kind of place that was rarely busy. Sam had known me since college, we'd gone through ups and downs together, and if anyone could understand, it was him. When I walked in, he looked up and immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Ethan," he greeted, concern already creasing his brow. "What's going on? You look like hell." I sat down, sighing heavily, and took a moment to collect myself. It's Amelia," I finally said, my voice barely steady. "I caught her, with one of her students. At her office." Sam's eyes widened, and he leaned in, his expression a mix of shock and sympathy. "You're serious? Amelia? I mean, she's always been so professional." I nodded, swallowing hard. I wish I wasn't serious, but I saw it myself. "And it wasn't a one-time thing, Sam. I've been looking through her emails, and there's this pattern. She's been talking to other students, late at night, meeting them outside of office hours. I don't know how deep it goes, but it's bad." Sam shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "Man, I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I want to expose her. I want to make sure people see what she's really like, not this perfect image she puts on. But I need proof, solid proof. That's why I came to you." He looked at me thoughtfully, his fingers tapping the table. "So, you want to gather testimonies, right? From other students who might have been in this situation with her?" "Exactly," I replied, feeling a surge of determination. "I'm thinking if we can talk to some of her former students, get them to open up, we might find a pattern. And if we do, I'll have enough to take to the university, maybe even the press." Sam nodded slowly, taking in the weight of my words. "All right. I'll help you, Ethan. But this won't be easy. Some of those students might be reluctant to talk, especially if they're afraid of the fallout." "I know," I admitted, my voice rough. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I can't just sit back and let her get away with this." Sam reached across the table, putting a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Then let's do this, but we've got to be smart. Start small, maybe ask around about any rumors, anything that sounds off. Once we get a lead, we'll go from there." We spent the next hour strategizing, and for the first time since that awful night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Sam promised to discreetly reach out to a couple of people who might know past students of Amelia's. In the meantime, I'd keep collecting whatever I could find in her emails and on her phone. When we finally left the bar, Sam gave me a hard look. "Ethan, I know this hurts, but don't let it consume you. This is going to get ugly, and I don't want you to lose yourself in it." I managed a bitter smile. "Too late for that, Sam. She's already taken more than I thought possible. But I'm going to make sure she doesn't take anything else." He sighed, shaking his head as he clapped me on the shoulder. "Just promise me you'll keep your head on straight. This might be the hardest thing you'll ever do, and once it's out there, there's no going back." "I understand," I said, feeling the weight of the task ahead but knowing I had no choice. This was my only way forward. As I drove home that night, I replayed Sam's words, his warning. But the truth was, I didn't care about the consequences. I was ready to burn it all down if that's what it took to finally reveal Amelia's betrayal. Days turned into weeks as I sank deeper into my investigation. I became a ghost in my own home, existing in the shadows while Amelia continued her life as if nothing had changed. She would leave in the morning with her coffee cup and laptop, wearing that same confident smile, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Each day, I collected more evidence, emails, texts, and notes, each piece solidifying the picture of betrayal I was trying to paint. After a week of sleepless nights and meticulous searching, I finally reached out to some of her former students. It was nerve-wracking, but I had to start somewhere. I chose to contact them via anonymous email, fearing retaliation if they knew it was me. My first message was simple, yet the response was anything but. One evening, I received a reply from a former student named Kevin, someone I'd spoken to a few times at school functions. His response was open, almost eager. "Hey, Ethan. I remember Amelia. She was a great professor, but there were definitely some weird vibes with her and the guys in her class. I'd be willing to share what I saw." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This was the first confirmation I'd had. I wasted no time drafting a response, inviting him to meet in a public place. When we finally met at a cafe, Kevin was a nervous young man, glancing around as if he expected someone to overhear us. "I really hope this is okay," he said, fidgeting with the edge of his coffee cup. "I don't want to get in trouble." I nodded, leaning in closer. "I promise, it's just between us. I just need to know what you saw." "You were in her class, right?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was great at first, really engaging. But then she started giving more attention to certain guys. It was subtle, but I don't know, it felt off. One guy, Sam, would come in for extra help, and she'd keep him after hours. I remember thinking it was strange." "What do you mean by strange?" I pressed, my interest piqued. "Did you see anything specific?" Kevin took a shaky breath, glancing around before leaning in even closer. "One time, I walked by her office after class. The door was half open, and I heard her laughing with him. It felt intimate, you know. Like, not the kind of laughter you share with a professor." I nodded, feeling a rush of vindication. This was it. "And did you notice if it happened with other students?" "Yeah," he said, the words tumbling out. "There was another guy, Derek, who was in her class too. Same thing, extra time, late nights, and all that. It didn't sit right with a lot of us." "What do you think it was?" I asked, curiosity gnawing at me. "Was it just her being friendly, or something more?" Kevin hesitated, a frown creasing his forehead. "I think it was more than just friendly. It felt like she was crossing the line. I can't be sure, but a couple of guys talked about how they felt uncomfortable with how she acted. It was like she was flirting or something. She'd say things that felt personal." My heart sank further into the pit of my stomach. This was more than just one incident. "Thanks, Kevin. You've been really helpful." After he left, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I needed to dig deeper, so I contacted a few more students and got similar stories. Each testimony was a piece of a larger puzzle, and they all pointed to the same disturbing conclusion: Amelia had turned her role as a professor into something that blurred ethical boundaries. As I compiled the information, I reached out to Sam again. I needed his support as I prepared to confront Amelia with the evidence I was gathering. When I met him later that week, the tension in the air was palpable. "Ethan, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, raising an eyebrow as I took a seat across from him at the bar. "I have," I replied, grimacing as I set down my folder filled with testimonies. "It's worse than I thought. I've gathered enough from 3 former students to show a clear pattern. She's been crossing lines with multiple guys, not just one." Sam's eyes widened. "Damn. Are you sure this is what you want to do? This could blow up in your face." "I know, but I can't just sit back and let her get away with it," I said, the determination flooding my voice. She's playing with these students' lives, and I refuse to be a bystander in my own marriage. She needs to be held accountable. Okay, Sam said, raising his hands in surrender. But you have to be prepared for the fallout. Once you confront her, there's no turning back. I'm ready for that, I assured him. I've lost everything already. What more can she take from me? Sam nodded, a look of understanding passing between us. Just be careful. She's a smart woman, and if she senses you're onto her, she might try to manipulate you or spin the narrative in her favor. I'll handle it, I replied, determination hardening in my voice. It's time she faced the consequences of her actions. As I left the bar, the weight of my decision settled on my shoulders. I was about to unearth a truth that could destroy the facade of our life together, but I knew it was necessary. Amelia had created a pattern of betrayal, and it was time to bring it to light. Each step forward felt like walking a tightrope, but I was prepared to risk it all for my dignity and for the truth. The air in our house felt charged, like the calm before a storm. After weeks of gathering evidence and testimonies, I was finally ready to confront Amelia. The collection of her betrayals weighed heavily on my heart, but I steeled myself, determined to see this through. I knew that the conversation would be volatile, but I had reached a point where I could no longer live under the same roof with the ghost of trust that had once existed between us. That evening, I decided to wait until she returned from her late lecture, a time when I knew she would be more relaxed. I had arranged the living room meticulously, evidence was stacked neatly on the coffee table, a visual testament to her transgressions. As the clock ticked closer to her arrival, I felt my stomach churn with anxiety and anger, a heady mixture that left me restless. When Amelia finally walked in, her laughter echoed through the hallway, the sound I once loved now slicing through me like glass. She stepped into the living room and immediately noticed the tense atmosphere. "Ethan? What's going on?" she asked, her smile fading as she caught sight of the papers on the table. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "We need to talk, Amelia." "Sit down." She frowned but complied, her brow furrowing with concern. "You're scaring me." "What's this about?" I gestured toward the papers, my voice steady but laced with fury. "It's about you and your students." Her expression shifted from concern to confusion, then to annoyance. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent with me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I've gathered testimonies from former students. They've seen you crossing boundaries, getting too close to them, flirting. Do you really think I wouldn't find out?" Amelia's eyes narrowed as she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms defensively. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting things to fit your narrative. I'm just a caring professor." "Caring? Is that what you call it?" I interrupted, anger boiling over. "You were with them in ways that were inappropriate, Amelia. Do you think your behavior is okay? Do you think it's professional?" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're being absurd. I mentor my students, and they respect me for it. There's nothing wrong with that. Respect? Is that what you call whispering sweet nothings and keeping them late after hours?" I shot back, feeling the weight of every betrayal pushing me forward. "Kevin said you were laughing with him in a way that felt intimate. Do you have any idea how that sounds?" Her facade began to crack, the confidence she wore so easily faltering. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These students come to me for help. I'm not some predator." "Then why do they all feel uncomfortable?" I countered, pushing the papers toward her. "Read them, Amelia. Just read what they've said. They felt uncomfortable with how you acted, how you treated them." She hesitated, her eyes scanning the pages. The silence in the room felt heavy as she read, and I could see the color drain from her face. Finally, she looked up, anger and disbelief swirling in her eyes. "This is just hearsay. They're twisting what happened. You don't know the context." "The context is that you betrayed our marriage," I said, my voice low but firm. "You've put your career before your ethics and our life together. Do you really think you can talk your way out of this?" Amelia's expression shifted again, and for the first time, I saw a panic flicker across her face. "Ethan, Please, let's not do this. You're blowing everything out of proportion. No, I replied, my resolve hardening. This isn't just a misunderstanding. I'm done being in the dark. You've chosen your path, and now it's time to face the consequences. She stepped closer, desperation in her eyes. Wait, think about this. We can work through it. You can't just throw everything away because of a few rumors. I can explain. You've already had your chances to explain, and all I've heard are excuses, I said, my voice steady. You've manipulated me and everyone around you for too long. The desperation turned into anger. You think you can just tear my life apart? You'll ruin my career. You'll ruin us, she shouted, her voice rising. I'm not the one who ruined us, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. You've been living a lie, and now the truth is out. I'm sending this evidence to the university. You need to understand that your actions have consequences. Ethan, please. Don't do this, she pleaded, her composure cracking as she stepped forward, trying to reach for my hand. We can fix this. I can change. I pulled back, my heart breaking at the sight of her desperation but knowing I could no longer bend. It's too late for that, Amelia. You made your choices, and now you'll have to deal with them. You need to take responsibility for what you've done. She stared at me, tears pooling in her eyes. You're really going to do this? Yes, I said firmly, refusing to back down. And I'm ready for whatever comes next. You've hurt too many people, and I won't stand by while you continue to do it. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words and the weight of our broken promises. Amelia's shoulders slumped as she finally looked away, her defenses crumbling. I could see the realization dawning on her, there was no way out of this. Ethan, she began, her voice trembling, but I knew there was nothing left to say. I turned and walked away, my heart breaking as I left her standing there, a shadow of the woman I once loved. As I reached for my phone, the finality of my decision settled in my chest. I would send the evidence to the university. There was no going back now. The truth would come out, and with it, Amelia's carefully constructed facade would shatter, leaving nothing but the wreckage of what once was.